I had just walked through the hotel doors when I heard her say it. Oh, good. The handyman finally showed up. Not to me. About me. Quiet enough to pretend I wasn't supposed to hear it. Loud enough for everyone standing around her to laugh. I froze in the middle of the lobby. My best dress shirt. Shoes I had polished since early morning. And just like that, at 64 years old, I felt like a foolish old man who had walked into a room where he was never welcome. What made it hurt even more? Was that the woman who just said that was about to become my son's mother-in-law? And she wasn't the only one who felt that way. I almost turned around and walked out. One foot was already turning toward the door. But right then, my son appeared. He pushed gently through the crowd, stepped close, and leaned in toward my ear, and whispered, "Dad, trust me, just tonight." He didn't explain anything else. Just that one line and a look in his eyes I had never seen before. I had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. Neither did they. My name is Raymond Cobb. People who know me call me Ray. I'm 64 years old, and I live on 32 acres outside of Conroe, Texas, about 40 miles north of Houston, out in Montgomery County, where the pine trees start to take over and the roads thin out, and the houses are spaced far enough apart that you can still hear yourself think. I was born here. My father worked this land before me. He was a pipe fitter on the oil rigs and a part-time cattle farmer, and I followed him into the fields at 18, spent 22 years doing equipment maintenance on drilling operations, and when I retired at 55, I came back to the acreage, vegetables, a few head of cattle, a small pecan orchard that I still argue with every autumn. Nothing that makes strangers straighten up when you describe it. But it's honest, it's mine, and every square foot of it came from work, the kind that stays in your hands. I've had calluses on my palms since I was 12 years old. My wife, Lorraine, was the kind of woman the world doesn't make enough of. Quiet and strong. Razor sharp about people. She could read a person in 5 minutes and be right about them for the next 20 years. We raised 2 children together in that house. My daughter Simone is 31 now. She married a high school history teacher named Gerald. They live in Houston's 3rd Ward with their little boy Theo, who is the funniest child I have ever encountered in my life. And then there's Darius, 33, a civil and agricultural engineer who graduated from Prairie View A&M on a full scholarship. Watching him walk that stage was the second proudest day of my life. The first was the day he was born. The third was the day I stood at Lorraine's hospital bedside, and she squeezed my hand and said, "Those kids are all right, Ray. They're going to be just fine." She was gone 2 days later. Heart failure. Fast and merciless. That was 5 years ago, and I won't pretend it doesn't still knock the wind out of me sometimes. Darius and I got closer after Lorraine passed. He drove out to the farm every weekend without fail. We'd work together mornings, eat lunch on the back porch, talk until the sun dropped behind the tree line. He was doing well, consulting on irrigation systems and land management for agricultural operations across southeast Texas. Good salary, good life, but more than any of that, he was present. He was my son in every way that mattered. About 20 months ago, he brought someone home. Her name was Vanessa Hartwell. She came from Scottsdale, Arizona, the kind of Scottsdale money that doesn't need to announce itself but does anyway, in the small, careful ways. Her father, Preston Hartwell, ran a holding company with interests in commercial real estate. Her mother, Claire, sat on charity boards and had never once in her life said something she hadn't rehearsed first. When Darius introduced Vanessa at a Sunday dinner at the farm, she smiled the entire time. Gracious, measured, not a single thing wrong on the surface. But Lorraine always told me, "Watch the eyes. Smiles can lie. Eyes take more effort." Vanessa's eyes, when they landed on me, did something I'd seen before and never liked. A quiet inventory, looking around the kitchen, at my hands, at the pegboard where I hang my tools. She wasn't rude, never said anything out of place. But she was measuring, and I had the distinct feeling I wasn't coming up to whatever standard she was applying. I told myself I was being a protective father. I talked myself out of it for 18 months. Preston and Claire Hartwell were the kind of people who make a room feel smaller the moment they walk in. I visited their property in Scottsdale, once sprawling house, pool, guest quarters, a 4-car garage holding 2 vehicles I couldn't name. Preston shook my hand the way you shake something you're obligated to touch. Claire asked me about farming the way people ask about a hobby they can barely disguise their pity for. She used the word pastoral to describe my livelihood. I had to confirm later that she was, in fact, being condescending. But Darius was happy, and so I kept my mouth shut and I kept going. Then came the engagement dinner. The Four Seasons in Houston. 50-plus guests. I got there a little late, a fence situation that morning. Plus the drive, though, I had cleaned up properly, ironed my clothes, polished my boots until they reflected light. I walked in doing the best I could with what I had, and that's when I heard her. Vanessa's voice, to her mother standing right beside her, low and casual. "Oh, good. The handyman finally made it. I cannot tell you exactly how many people heard it. Enough. I saw a woman look away quickly. I saw a man find something urgent in his drink. The room did that thing rooms do when something uncomfortable passes through a ripple of almost silence. I turned to leave. I want to be honest with you right now. I had one hand already moving toward that door. 64 years of life, and I still felt like a 12-year-old who didn't know which fork to use. That is what shame does to a person. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care how hard you've worked or how clean your hands are or how long you've been doing the right thing. It just drops you back into the smallest version of yourself and dares you to walk forward anyway. Then Darius was there. 4 words. "Dad, trust me." Tonight, I stayed. The dinner passed. I sat with some of Darius's colleagues, engineers, solid people, who asked me real questions and treated me like a man worth talking to. But every few minutes, I'd glance toward the main table where Vanessa was laughing with her parents, and Preston would catch my eye and hold it for a moment, that look of his, the one that says he has already categorized you and filed you away, and he is simply confirming the label. After most guests left, Darius found me and asked me to walk with him to his truck. We sat in the cab in the parking structure. He closed the doors. He was quiet for a moment, just looking at his hands. Then he said, "Dad, I need to show you something, and I need you to let me get through all of it before you react." He opened his phone. Audio files, 15 or more of them, labeled by date. Before I could ask, he pressed play on the first one. Vanessa's voice came through the speaker. Clear, relaxed. Utterly unlike the woman I'd been watching smile for a year and a half. 6 weeks, Mom. Then I'm in. Once we're married, I start working on the property situation. Dad already has buyers lined up. And Claire's voice completely unbothered. And if his father resists? And Vanessa again almost amused. Men like that trust their sons completely. Darius asks him to sign. He'll sign. I sat there and felt the bottom of the world drop out. The land she was talking about, my land, sits in a corridor that Montgomery County had approved, quietly, for a major highway extension about 18 months prior. Most people didn't know about it yet, but Preston Hartwell, with his real estate network, did. He had calculated, with patience and precision, that my 32 acres would be worth somewhere between 8 and 12 times its current value within 2 to 3 years. And he had engineered his daughter's engagement as the mechanism for acquiring it. There were more recordings. There were videos. Darius had spent 3 weeks going back to the Hartwell's house, documenting conversations, photographing documents Preston had left on his desk. He found preliminary sale agreements bearing my name on the signature line. My name, forged, clean, notarized with a stamp that forensic analysis would later prove was fabricated. He found correspondence with development buyers. He found the entire plan, laid out and operational. I couldn't speak. I just sat in the dark cab of his truck and held his phone and felt everything I thought I knew rearranging itself. "Son," I finally said, "what are you going to do?" He told me. And honestly, part of me resisted. Part of me is a man who was raised to solve things with dignity and without spectacle. My father's voice is still in my head. Keep it between people. Don't perform your pain. Don't make a scene. Part of me wanted to say, let's cancel quietly, protect what's ours, without lighting the whole thing on fire in public. Then I thought about Vanessa's voice on that recording. Casual, slightly amused, planning the disposal of my life's work the same way you'd plan a weekend. I thought about Preston's hand on Darius's shoulder at that dinner, that pat that said she's your problem now. I thought about Lorraine. And I thought about what she always said when I was about to swallow something that shouldn't be swallowed. Let the truth breathe, Ray. I said, I'm with you, all the way. The next morning I met Darius at his apartment and was introduced to a friend of his, Devon, an audiovisual technician who had already agreed to help. They'd arranged for a projection system in the ceremony hall, told the venue it was a romantic photo display, paid a gratuity to the manager to accommodate the last-minute setup. The timing was planned to the minute. Devin showed me how the edited recordings would play subtitled, sequenced, unambiguous. I went back to my hotel room alone that night. Put on my suit, same one I wore to Simone's wedding. Looked in the mirror for a while. Thought about Lorraine. Thought about my father and his father and the 3 generations of early mornings and broken equipment and sweat baked into that land. And something settled in my chest. Not rage, not even anticipation. Just clarity. The ceremony was set for 2 in the afternoon. I arrived early and watched the room fill. The Hartwell's contingent appeared first. Preston, with his chest forward. Claire, in a dress that probably cost more than my truck payment. Their circle flowed in behind them, the whole theater of respectability. Darius stood at the front of the room in his black suit, and to every other person there, he looked like a nervous groom waiting. I knew my son. I could read him across 50 feet. His jaw was set. His hands were still. He was ready. The music started. Vanessa appeared at the back of the room in a gown that probably had its own insurance. She walked the aisle on Preston's arm, radiating everything she wanted people to see. Preston handed her to Darius with a look I can only describe as victorious, a man convinced he had just completed a transaction. He went to sit beside Claire. Claire looked across at me. I held her eyes and did not look away. The officiant welcomed everyone. Readings were given. Someone near the front began to cry. Preston maintained that smile, and then the officiant turned to Darius. "Darius Cobb, do you take Vanessa Hartwell to be your lawfully wedded?" Darius raised his hand. "Before I answer," he said, in a voice that reached every corner of that room without needing to be raised, "there is something every person here has a right to see." The officiant blinked. Vanessa's smile froze completely, and at the back of the room, the screen lit up. "I want to slow this down for you, because it happened slowly." The room didn't understand all at once. First there was confusion, heads turning, people leaning toward each other. Then there was recognition, as Vanessa's face appeared on the footage, and her voice came through the room's speakers. And then there was silence, not the quiet kind. The kind where everyone in a room arrives at the same understanding at exactly the same moment. Her voice filling the space. "Once we're married, I start working on the property situation. Dad already has buyers lined up. Her mother asking what happens if Ray resists. Vanessa, with that slight amusement. Men like that trust their sons completely." I was watching guests' faces rather than the screen. I already knew what was on it. I watched a woman in the 4th row press her hand to her mouth. I watched one of Darius's close friends rise slowly from his seat. I watched Claire Hartwell go the color of old paper. Preston was on his feet. "Shut that thing off. That is edited. That is a fabrication." The recording kept going. The second clip was Preston in his own study, leaning over his desk, voice low and businesslike. "The corridor gets approved. That land triples. We need it in our name before the public survey. Vanessa manages the son. We manage the paperwork." A sound moved through the room, not quite a gasp. Something heavier. Several people on Vanessa's side stood up. 2 walked toward the exit. The third recording was from the night of the engagement dinner. 2 women's voices, clearly in a restroom, touching up their appearances. Vanessa: "I don't know how much longer I can smile at that man. He walked in looking like he'd just come off a work site." Claire, laughing softly: "Just a little longer. After the wedding, Darius distances himself. We won't have to keep pretending." The room broke open. I stayed completely still. I had promised Darius I would stay still, and I held to that, though what it cost me, I will not try to describe. Vanessa at the altar was crying, the tears coming fast, like a switch thrown. "Those are edited. Those are out of context. Darius, tell them." But Darius had turned to face the guests, and his voice was so level it was almost frightening. "Everything you heard has been certified by forensic audio analysts. The property documents bearing my father's signature are forgeries. This plan has been running for over a year." Preston charged toward the back of the room, toward Devin in the AV booth. Devin stepped out, locked the door behind him, and the presentation continued. Documents now: sale agreements, buyer correspondence, projected profits. Preston's name on all of it. Dates of contact that preceded the engagement by months. Then a man in the 3rd row stood. He was maybe 55, well-dressed but without performance about it. He introduced himself to the room without drama. "My name is Alton Burke. I serve as an assistant district attorney for Harris County." I was invited to this ceremony as a personal friend of the Hartwell family. He looked directly at Preston. Mr. Hartwell, what I have witnessed constitutes evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, document forgery, and theft by deception. I am advising you not to leave this building. I remember thinking, Lorraine would have loved this moment. Preston blustered. Claire wept. Vanessa tried to move toward the exit and was firmly stopped by 3 of Darius's friends who simply placed themselves in her path. She didn't fight it. She crumpled there in her $1,000 gown, on the ballroom floor, and sobbed. And I know a person is supposed to feel something complicated about that. Maybe I did, somewhere deeper down, but what I felt in that immediate moment was the weight lifting. The weight of 32 acres and 3 generations and 5 years of missing Lorraine and 18 months of swallowing something that tasted wrong, all of it releasing. If you have ever walked into a room where you felt like you didn't quite belong, where you'd done everything right and still felt the invisible judgment, you know exactly what the release of that weight feels like. That moment when the truth catches up to what you already knew in your gut but couldn't prove. That moment when the room stops looking through you and starts actually seeing. Police arrived within 20 minutes. All 3 Hartwells were escorted out. Preston still arguing, Claire behind dark glasses, Vanessa with her veil askew. Some guests filmed on their phones. Others stood in stunned silence. One of Vanessa's cousins came to Darius, crying, saying she was sorry, that she truly hadn't known. The officiant had gone. The catering sat untouched. The music was cued and waiting. Darius found me in the thinning crowd, and we stood side by side without talking for a while. Then he said, "The food's already paid for, Dad." I looked around. Some guests had left. But Darius's real friends were still there. Simone had rushed over the moment she heard, her husband Gerald beside her. A handful of Vanessa's own extended family had quietly chosen which side of the room to stand on. Darius said, "I'd rather celebrate than grieve." So we did. We ate. We put the music on. We danced. I danced with Simone, who held my face in her hands and said, "Mama would be so proud of you both, Daddy." And I had to look away for a second because that landed somewhere deep and undeniable. Honestly, if that had been me 20 years younger, I don't know if I could have stayed in that room the way Darius did. I don't know if I could have held myself still through those recordings playing, watching the woman I loved reduce my father to a punchline while guests who barely knew us turned to stare. That kind of sustained composure, the kind that doesn't flinch and doesn't perform, is its own kind of strength. I want you to sit with that. In the weeks that followed, Alton Burke built the case methodically. Darius provided every recording and document. Forensic experts authenticated all of it. The investigation revealed what we hadn't fully known. The Hartwells were in serious financial trouble. The Scottsdale estate, the charity boards, the holding company, all of it was a facade held together with debt and the kind of borrowed credibility that requires a continuous supply of new victims. Preston had civil judgments in 2 other states. Claire had maxed credit instruments across 4 accounts. They needed our land because they were desperate in a way they had spent years hiding. That, I'll admit, gave me a complicated feeling. Not sympathy exactly, but an understanding of the difference between cruelty for its own sake and cruelty as a survival strategy adopted so young it became second nature. A woman named Patricia Vance contacted us 3 weeks after the canceled wedding. She had been briefly engaged to a Hartwell family associate 4 years earlier. The same playbook questions about her family's property, pressure to share financial access, then threats when she disengaged. She testified at trial. 2 other people came forward with similar accounts. The settlement offer arrived before trial. $300,000 and a formal public apology in exchange for dropping all charges. Darius and I sat with it for about 10 minutes. Then I said no. Not because I'm rich and didn't need the money. I am not rich and I could have used it. I said no because some things don't have a number attached. I said no because Patricia Vance deserved to tell her story in a courtroom. I said no because whoever came after us, and there would have been someone after us, deserved not to go through this. The trial was 2 weeks. The defense painted Darius as a vindictive ex-fiancé who had fabricated an elaborate revenge. It was a creative argument. It had nowhere to stand. You cannot argue manipulation in the face of your own voice on certified recordings. You cannot argue forgery away when your own documents are examined by handwriting experts. You cannot argue pattern when 5 people from different cities and different years describe the identical sequence of events. Guilty on all counts. Preston Hartwell, 11 years. Claire, 7. Vanessa, 9. The judge said something in her final remarks that I have written on a piece of paper I keep by the kitchen window, the one that looks out over the property. She said, "The calculation this family made that dignity is cheap, that integrity can be outmaneuvered, that a man's worth is determined by his address, was the precise error that brought them here." Darius came home to the farm, not as a retreat, as a decision. He said the city had been him auditioning for a life that wasn't actually his, trying to impress people who were keeping score in a game he hadn't agreed to play. He consults remotely now. Runs the irrigation side of the property. 2 years ago he married a woman named Tanya, a soil scientist from Huntsville who showed up to their 3rd date in work boots, and has never once made me feel like furniture in my own house. They got married here, on the land, under the pecan trees, with 40 people who genuinely knew us. It was the best day I have had since Lorraine. Here is what this story taught me. And I mean this not as a platitude, but as something I had to earn. The people who try hardest to diminish you are usually the most afraid of what you represent. Vanessa Hartwell didn't call me the handyman because she believed it was accurate. She said it because she needed to believe it. She needed me small so that what she was doing remained survivable to her, so that she could keep telling herself it wasn't personal, wasn't wrong, was just business. The mistake most people make, when they encounter that kind of dismissal, is to turn it inward, to ask what they could have done differently to deserve more respect. The answer is nothing. There was nothing to fix. The problem was never yours. What Darius understood that nobody else in that room quite grasped until the screen came on was that the truth doesn't require permission. It doesn't need the right moment, or the right venue, or the right audience. It just needs someone willing to stand up and let it speak. And the question I want to leave you sitting with today, not as accusation, just as something to carry home, is this. Is there a room in your life where you've been making yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable? And if so, how long do you plan to keep doing that? I am 64 years old. I have calluses on my palms, and a pecan orchard out back, and a son who drives out for dinner 3 nights a week. I wake before the sun, and I work until my back tells me to stop, and I sleep like a man with nothing to hide. That is the whole inheritance I was ever after. That is all I ever wanted to leave behind. Now, before you go, I need something from you. Drop a comment and tell me. Type a 1 if you think Darius was right to expose the Hartwells publicly at the ceremony, in front of everyone. Type a 2 if you would have taken that settlement offer. $300,000 is real money, and there's no shame in saying so. And type a 3 if you would have walked straight back out those hotel doors the moment you heard those words, and never looked back. I want to know. I will read every single one. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Someone is going to be watching this at 2 in the morning from somewhere I wouldn't expect, and somehow this is the story they needed tonight. That means something to me every single time. If this found you, if something here landed somewhere real, I'd be glad to have you stay. I share stories like this as often as I can. Hit subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Houston, Texas to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, locations, or events is entirely coincidental.